You're listening to Tips and Tools for Teachers.
All right, I would like to welcome our guest today, Dr. David Rockwood. He earned his bachelor's degree in psychology teaching from Brigham Young University in 2003, his master's degree in educational psychology from the University of Utah in 2008, and then his doctorate degree in educational leadership from the University of Utah in 2018. Dave has taught a variety of classes at Payson High School, Utah for 14 years, including psychology, philosophy, world religions, Spanish, and sports psychology. He coached track and field, cross country, and wrestling for 20 years, winning several region and state championships, and more importantly, being a positive mentor and role model for thousands of student athletes. In addition, Dr. Rockwood has served as an adjunct instructor for psychology at Utah Valley University and Brigham Young University in Idaho. He has worked as a school administrator in the Nebo School District since 2017. Dr. Rockwood is also a published author with his book titled Closing the Gap: Applied Sports Psychology for High School, that focuses on how to develop the mental skills that lead to excellence in sports performances. So Dr. Rockwood, thank you and welcome. And I appreciate your willingness to share some time and some of your experiences with us today.
I'm excited.
All right.
Do it.
So you taught for 14 years in the Payson School District as a teacher. What were the most common classroom disruptions that you experienced?
So the classes I taught were elective classes, which is unique in that the students who choose to take it usually start off with a higher level of intrinsic interest than you get in a class that's a more general demographic class, like just sophomore English or math or something like that. So I think that changed a little bit the kind of disruptions or the kind of maybe misbehaviors that I would see. But probably the most common would be students chit-chatting with each other. The later part of my career, cell phones became more common to the majority of students, and so distractions on cell phones became pretty common. You also get issues of students like passing by the classroom. Maybe they're like through the hallway, maybe they left their class to go to the bathroom or whatever, and they'll poke their head in and they'll wave it, and say hi to students in a class, and that can be distracting as well. But for the most part, my classes didn't have maybe as many or maybe different kinds than what you would see in a more general education class or a required class that everybody has to take, where you're gonna get a more cross-section, a more generalized cross-section of students.
Right, because of that interest you hold,
right,
their
right.
behaviors usually improve. So how did you handle disruptions that you saw in your classroom?
The first thing is going to be prevention. And so what we find is that when I, as a teacher, the more prepared I was with the activities for that day, the fewer disruptions, the fewer misbehaviors that I had, especially kind of a moment for kind of peak disruption or moments of transition from one activity to another activity, which you have to handle those transitions. You cannot do one thing straight through an entire class period, especially when you're on kind of a block schedule like we are here at Payson High, where one period is 80 minutes long. No matter how interesting you think your lectures are, you cannot lecture for 80 straight minutes and maintain engagement the entire time. You have to have a variety of activities built in with transition times. And those transition times are when you get these kind of peak moments for disruption. So the more prepared you are, the more prepared the students sense that you are, the lower those disruptions tend to be. It's when there's moments of, okay, well, now let's do this. It's in those moments when you start to their attention starts to fracture, and you get heightened disruption. So I think the first thing there is preparation, and number one on that list would be being prepared. Prevention by being prepared with interesting activities. If you go in maybe even with a little bit more in mind than what you're planned out, then what you'd be able to fit into that class period. It gives you a little bit of flexibility when you see that you're starting to lose them on one thing, you can just jump to something else. And that's something else that I would have is a series of or a toolbox of some kind of micro activities that you could pull out in the moment when you appear to be losing some student engagement. Where you could say, just as an example, you're going along, you're doing one activity, you realize I'm starting to lose some interest, and so you say, okay, so next what we're going to do, class, and this is something you just have in the back of your mind that you can pull out at any moment because it doesn't take a whole lot of preparation. So, okay, class, now what I want you to do is I'm going to get with your neighbor and get out a blank piece of paper. What you're going to do is, we've been talking about topic, whatever, X, Y, or Z for the last little bit. With your partner, I want you to design a tattoo that communicates this idea or teaches this concept or illustrates, principle X, Y, or Z. Then you give them 5 minutes to get there with a neighbor or do it on their own and design this tattoo. And you have them, present to their groups or whatever. And suddenly that you've switched activities, they're now re-engaged and disruptions go significantly down. And so that was just one just off the top of my head. But if you get good 10, 15 of those, just quick, I can pull them out activities that don't require much preparation. When you see that your disruptions are going up and students are getting distracted, you can pull that out. Another really very common go-to way of handling disruption is what we call proximity. You may have learned this already if you've taken a class on classroom management. Proximity meaning just being geographically closer to a student that's being disruptive. Their misbehavior, the disruption tends to go down. And so oftentimes you'll be teaching or you'll be facilitating an activity and then a student over here is being disruptive and you just continue doing what you're doing. You just move across the classroom until you're standing next to their desk and usually whoop, it goes right down. With the cell phones, one thing that I have found is the more, this is going to sound maybe counterintuitive, but the more rigidly controlling you try to be, the more they try to get around that, which then creates further disruptions. And so a couple ideas, I know we have some teachers in our school that say at the beginning of class, all right, everybody, get your cell phones out, please put it on the corner of your desk. If you get a text, you can just peek over and look at it, but please don't pick it up and start responding until I give you a moment to do that. And they find that just by giving students a little bit of a pressure release valve by having the phone on the corner of their desk, they don't feel quite so disconnected, but they're able to then stay focused. Also with the phones, one thing that I would do occasionally, this is another one of my little micro activities I'd pull right out if I see that I'm losing them. I would say, okay, let's do this. Everybody get out your cell phones. Just everyone get out your cell phones. What I want you to do is I want you to text to the most important person in your life the definition of X, Y, or Z, or the whatever the principle is that we're learning about in that moment. I'd have them just text that to someone that's important to them. And then suddenly, because they're using their phone, it then gets it out of everyone's system. All right, now put them away. Now we're going to refocus and continue. So anyway, those are some go-tos there. Humor is another way to handle disruption. If you and your students can laugh together, then telling them like, oh, put your cell phone away. It's a lot less combative if you have built this relationship with them. Of being able to kind of laugh together and have a good time together, which I think also goes back to the idea of prevention, that by building a strong relationship with your students at the beginning, then handling disruptions, handling classroom management is significantly easier because you're not seen as an adversary. You're not, the man who's trying to stick it to them, but you have this strong relationship. So.
That's very helpful. And we've talked some about, not in this setting, but building those strong relationships or getting a good relationship with your students. Do you have any helpful suggestions at the first of the year of things to do to start that connection? Sorry, that was a question I didn't give you in advance.
That's okay. Throw it in there. It's okay. I think, like I already mentioned, I think humor, if you can laugh with your students, together, not laugh at them, although sometimes that happens, that's okay too, but laughing with your students that really greases the wheels of relationships. Number two would be having one-on-one conversations with your students, which can be challenging when you have a classroom of 30 or 40 students. How do you facilitate that? Well, there's ways to do it. One thing that I would do is, this was in my introductory psychology class that I taught, is I did what was called a layered curriculum, which is the students would have a menu of choices of activities that they could do in order to demonstrate to me that they are understanding and maybe mastering the different principles that we were learning about. So instead of everyone in the class doing the same activity, they'd have a menu of options. And I tried to limit the kind of like direct instruction, teacher-centric activities to half the class period or less, and the other half of the class or more were the students all working on their individual projects. And I know in the world of kind of career and technical education, we call it CTE here in Utah, it's very project based. And so that shouldn't be a problem for anyone teaching in those subject areas. And then what I would do during that time is, instead of just go to my desk and sit down and just watch them all work or work on my own thing, is I'd go around and have one-on-one conferences with students. It would take me usually 1 to 2 class periods to get through an entire class worth of students. And I just check in with them. Where are you at? What are you doing? What are you working on? And that's also a great way to reduce the out of class time grading that you have to do as a teacher, because if in that one-on-one conference, you're able to see that they are mastering the concept, you can then just check off that they've done it, and then just put in the computer, the grading system, without having to have a stack of stuff turned into you that you have to grade over the weekend. But in addition to that, in those little one-on-one conferences and mini conversations, I could talk about how'd your weekend go? I saw that you're in the play. Man, I went to that play on Friday night and it was amazing. You did so good. Or I went to the basketball game, or whatever. You can have those connections, and those connections there, those one-on-one connections are invaluable in building relationships. I would also throw in there relationships not only with students, but as much as possible with parents. If communicating home to parents with an email or a phone call is huge. Not only calling home when there's a problem, but calling home to say that a student's doing particularly well, or that you notice that they went out of their way to help someone else in class and you're really proud of them. Those are like just money in the bank, both with the students and with the teachers. Another thing would be a postcard home as well. So those are some of my ideas or things that work for building relationships.
Well, those sound really helpful.
Yeah.
So now you are in the administrative position, and you kind of supervise teachers, or you have that connection there. How would you like to see teachers handle classroom disruptions? Do you see anything that they do that's wrong that you would prefer maybe a teacher not do?
Yeah, every once in a while, to answer the last part of your question, what do we see maybe that's wrong? Every once in a while, we see teachers who view disruptions or frame it in their mind as a battle of will or a power, a battle of who's going to win in this power dynamic. And so what happens is the student does this and the teacher has to one up to try to win. And then the student then tries to one up them to win. And when it turns into I need to win this, if that's what's in the back of your mind, you've lost. Because what happens, it escalates, it spins out of control, and it becomes way worse than it could have been in the first place. So, a better way is, here's an example. A lot of it has to do with how you go into that encounter, how you frame it in your mind. Sometimes teachers say to themselves, and parents do the same thing, but teachers say to themselves, this is just attention-seeking behavior from this student. And they see that as a negative thing. Well, if you replace the word attention with the word connection, this is connection-seeking behavior, then you're probably closer to what's actually going on. And so maybe pulling the student out into the hallway where the student isn't being showcased in front of their classmates and feeling like they have to win or they'll lose whatever their reputation or credibility with their classmates. Pull them into the hallway, have a private conversation, and just be really calm and say, you really seem to be out of sorts today. Is something going on? Did you eat this morning? Did you is this, and trying to connect at a human level rather than I have to win this engagement and it's a combat adversarial relationship. That goes a long way. Number two, when students when it really kind of does escalate and their emotions kind of flip out of control, you can't really stay emotionally in that fight or flight response on the student side if they're eating or drinking. So if you have a stash of granola bars, M&M packets, and things that you can give them to eat, or water bottles to drink, suddenly you can have a human conversation if they're eating or drinking. So get them in a private setting, and not so private that you're going to get in trouble as a teacher. I don't mean like, meet with them after school all by yourself, but pull them out of the hallway and have a private conversation with them. And if they're eating something or drinking, that goes a long way as well. That can help. What we find is just that the teachers with the most success, that have the fewest amount of disruptions, or that they happen and they handle them very well, it's because they have a prior strong relationship with the students, a relationship of trust, and they don't engage in power struggles. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah. So just so that these students right now who are preparing to be teachers have a better sense of what happens on your end when a student is sent to the principal's office by a teacher, if it escalates that far.
It really varies. We try to take that as administrators on a kind of a case-by-case basis. Some of the advice that I just finished giving, I try to use as well. I try to sometimes give them something to eat, try to de-escalate the situation to get the emotions down so that we can have a human conversation and not an emotionally charged fight or flight kind of conversation where they feel like they're trying to survive. If I can get them to laugh, I'm in a great place. At some point, we'll often end up calling home and talking to the parents. And those call homes, talking with parents, again, it's about how you frame things. Whether as an administrator or a teacher, a great way to frame that is not to say your kid is in so much trouble, let me tell you all the bad things they did, but rather, we've been struggling, your student and I, to kind of get on the same page here. This is kind of what's been happening. And I know your student much better than I do. So what advice do you have for me? How can we help this student really succeed? And if you can get the parent on the same side with you, that you're a team, that goes a long way. And that's an approach that I try to take as a parent. Sometimes, depending on what happens, we'll end up just keeping the student with us here in the office for the rest of the class period, and not return them to the class in order to kind of give both the teacher and the student a break to de-escalate their emotions, and then kind of get back to it the next time they have that class, whether it's tomorrow or the day after. Sometimes if it was something that it's easily handled, we'll handle it and then get them back into class as quickly as possible. It just kind of depends on the situation. And if it's something really serious that requires school level discipline, if it was like, a physical altercation between students, or something like that, then we look into more serious school discipline, maybe a suspension or things, which unfortunately we have to do sometimes.
So I know you've already given us a lot of great advice. Think back to when you were a new teacher. Can you share anything that you wished that you know now, that you wished you'd known then, that you would like to share with us? And it can be associated with classroom disruptions or even something beyond that.
Okay, I could talk about that for hours. First of all, I had much different hair back when I was a new teacher, better or worse, depending on your point of view. So some things that I wish I knew then that I do know now. Yes, we have a tendency as educators to teach the way we were taught, to use the same kind of approaches, the same kinds of lesson plans and structures that we remember from when we were students, and our teachers taught us that way. What that means is sometimes what we end up doing is perpetuating what I would jokingly call the false traditions of our fathers, or just ways of teaching that we know don't work, but that's what we've always done. Education is a really big ship to steer. There's a lot of powerful cultural and historical momentum and inertia that we perpetuate certain practices that they just don't work. And we have a lot of research that show they don't work. One interesting example would be, for the most part, homework just does not work in that it doesn't increase student learning. But we have a tendency just to keep on doing it. And we say to ourselves, well, if I'm not assigning homework, I'm not doing my job. And that's just, if it doesn't work, then you're spinning your wheels. A lot of teachers as well, we get frustrated with the amount of grading that we need to do. And I think that maybe is a little bit needless. I just described a little earlier in this conversation, doing one-on-one conferences with students instead of grading things after school on your own. And that gives you this connection. And it also allows you to really get a feel for where the student is at. What we're trying to do in education now as administrators is move the conversation with teachers away from grading and task completion to learning. Does the student understand this? And if the answer is yes, they do, then the student's grade should reflect that, rather than the grade being an accumulation of points they earn by completing tasks. And it's just, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe this. When we assign practice for the students to do, and it's intended to be practice because we know they do not yet fully understand this concept, or they haven't yet mastered this skill, so we assign practice. If we score that practice and average that score in with the other scores for the term, and that turns into the student's grade at the end, it wasn't practiced. It was an exam. And if we're, I'm going to say, penalizing their final grade because they didn't understand it at the point when they were supposed to be practicing it and they weren't supposed to understand it, we have made our classroom an academically unsafe place to learn, because learning requires mistake making. One thing that I've talked to my teachers about is what here at Payson High School we call the learning formula, as if it were an equation, which is struggle plus discourse or dialogue equals learning. And if your classroom is not a safe place to struggle and make mistakes, then it's not a safe place to learn. And what you'll find is students will go through the motions of checking off boxes, task completion, to get a grade at the end, but that will then supersede the idea of learning. So if you can get grades as much as possible just off the table, then the students are more freed up to actually learn. Which is a little bit of an art to that. We say that teaching is both a science and an art, and this side's a little bit more of the art side to that. But the more you can prioritize the learning away from task completion, the better off you're going to be, and the less after school work you're going to have for yourself, because you haven't piled it onto yourself by assigning a whole lot of stuff. As a track coach, if I had a runner coming into the season, at the beginning of the season, running, let's say, a 6-minute mile, and at the end of the season, they're running a 5-minute mile, I would not then tell that runner, congratulations, you're a 5:30 miler, averaging where they started and where they ended. I would say, congratulations, you're a 5-minute miler. That's fantastic. Unfortunately, as educators, we often do the wrong version of that, where we average together how well they were doing when they didn't know how to do it yet with how they were doing at the end, and we say, that middle there is your final score, when in reality it should be, you've progressed, and here's where you're at now, then this is your grade. You earned an A. We have one teacher here at our school, several that do this, actually more than just one, who are in this trend that we call the gradeless classroom, or the no grade classroom, where it is project based, and the students keep kind of a portfolio of these projects throughout the term. And then and the teacher has these check-ins, like I described, throughout the entire term. And at the end, the student then sits down with the teacher and showcases their work. Here's where I started. You can see how I wasn't doing this very well yet. I wasn't doing that very well yet. You can tell by some of my early artifacts here. Here at the end is some of my final projects. You can see how much better I've gotten in this and that. And the student walks the teacher through their learning. And then at the end, the teacher says, "That looks fantastic. What grade do you think you deserve from all of this?" And usually teachers or the students will say, "Well, I don't know, maybe like a B." It's because they don't want to, they're trying to be modest. And then that gives you an opportunity as a teacher to be like, you're crazy. look how good you are now. Look at where you started and how much progress you've made. You deserve an A. And you can talk them into that. And by taking kind of the stress of grades off of the table, the students are more freed to just learn and just explore and be interested in what you're teaching. So early on, that's what I wish I had learned, because I think I made some of those mistakes early on. Where I just, my job is to assign homework and to grade that homework, and then I average it at the end. And my job as a teacher is I'm just the scorekeeper. But the reality is that's not how it is. So anyway, some of my thoughts. I can keep going for forever, but those are some
Well,
of my
thank you, Dr. Rockwood. I really appreciate it. And all of your insights were very helpful. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, let me throw one more thing out there. You as a teacher, that learning formula I just described, struggle plus discourse equals understanding or learning, that's true for you as well. Teachers should never self-identify as a master teacher. I am now a master teacher, because there's always more to learn. Others can call you that when you're really good, but the best teachers always see themselves as students of their subject area, students of the craft of education and educating, that they're always learning, you're going to conferences, you're reading books, you're reading articles, you're having conversations with your colleagues to progress and grow. And that struggle plus discourse equals learning or understanding is true for you as well, which means give yourself the freedom to try something new, think outside of the box, be innovative in something, and give yourself the freedom to let it fail spectacularly. And then you discuss with your colleagues, and that was a huge mistake, or it was a failure. How do I make that better for the future? And tweak it and then try it again. Give yourself the freedom to do that, which is the same kind of freedom that you need to give your students to be able to do as well. To try to swing big and fail big sometimes, and to learn from it and move on and be better afterwards. So there you go.
All right.
That's some other advice to give.
Yeah, more wonderful advice. So thank you.